Cool. All right. Hey, welcome to Red River Podcast. I think this is like number 95.
Yeah.
Um, we do love to talk our action movies and pop culture, and today we get a chance to talk to someone who I kind of feel is like a kindred spirit to what we do. You just decided to do it in a book format. So, Austin Trunick.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So, just explain. So you're someone. I don't know your background, but you decided to, write a book called the Canon Film Guide, from 1980 to 84. So those are the movies that you picked, and then from there, the new book that you have coming out tackles 85 to 87. And I'm just kind of curious. Like, I mean, I'm sure we're all kind of like the same age. So, like, what was like the idea that sparked in your brain that you're like, I need to do this?
Well, these are a lot of the movies. I grew up in the video store era, and every Friday night was I would go to the shop with my dad, and we'd rent a stack of movies, and we'd come home with them, and that was our entertainment for the weekend. You had to choose it right there in that little stop inside the shop. And yeah, so years and years later, I mean, a little older, I could rent those movies on my own, and I sort of fell in love with the ninja films, and a lot of the Chuck Norris movies, the odds and ends. But it didn't really grasp in my head. I recognized the Canon logo, but it wasn't until a long time later that I realized this same company made a lot of these very fast, cheap action movies that I happened to grow up on. And so, yeah, I went as an adult. I began writing about film. That's what I went to school for. And I wanted a project that I could work on my own that was just sort of a long form project besides all the freelancing I'd done for various outlets. And my brain kept coming back to Canon. By this time, the Blu-rays were starting, and you would get commentaries and things like that. There was a great Sam Furstenberg commentary track on Revenge of the Ninja and Avenging Force and things like that. And it's like you hear these stories, and you want to learn more about it because the stories behind these movies are sometimes crazier than the films themselves, believe it or not. And
Yeah,
that's where it began.
yeah, for sure. Especially like movies like this, because we had Sam on. I remember I told you, I was like,
Mm.
oh, via Twitter, I was like, man, I can't believe Sam said yes. And you were like, Sam is really cool. If he says he's going to do it, he's going to do it. And he did. He was just like, no ego. He's like, yeah, whatever, man, let's talk. And it's basically from that, I always like to say Roger Corman world, where it's like you have a certain amount of money and these guys figure it out, and I was just mentioning to Brian, that's Brian, by the way, I'm Sam. And I was mentioning to him, like the appeal of it, because I'm 43 and I just watched The Suicide Squad. Okay. So I'm watching this movie. I love James Gunn. It's not, I don't really give a fuck about like comic. I don't know what the source material is of that, but it was fun. I love Slither. So I watch it. But to me, these movies seem like it looks like a video game. It just looks
Mm.
like a video game. And I get it. That's just what it is now. And people aren't going to do sets and stunt doubles and all that other shit. But that was my detachment from like the action genre. Are you still in tune with the action genre, or do movies like that have no appeal to you?
To a degree. I mean, I enjoy John Wick and things like
Yeah.
that. I think there are still good action movies being made, but I do miss that sort of. I think what you're saying is like everything on camera. What you're seeing is what's actually happening. Back in the Canon days, yeah, it was stuntmen, stunt doubles, and sometimes the stars. Chuck Norris did a lot of these stunts, and Sho Kosugi especially. There's so many films he almost seriously injured himself on during these stunts in these films. And yeah, that's something that stopped. Even you look at Canon and probably their most special effects heavy movie, Life Force, that was still at an era where it wasn't computers. They When the zombie lady sits up in the movie, you've got it's 23 puppeteers and three computers running this thing. That is the most advanced animatronics they ever did. Because yeah, shortly after that, it was all computers, Jurassic Park and things like that. And you lose something there by not having everything
Yeah,
happening
no, for
right
sure,
on
for sure.
camera.
And I
I've
get
always made the comparison. It's always like, especially for our generation, these films are a little bit like comfort food, And I always said like the effects. It's always like the when people compare like the warmth of an analog vinyl record sound versus a digital CD, or even like you mentioned before, going with your father to the video store and getting that versus now you can stream it. There's benefits and there's detractions from both
we
things,
love
but,
all that
yeah.
stuff. I mean, and now like when we talk, we always talk about Tubi TV, and like all these places.
A lot of Canon on Tubi.
A lot of Tubi, yeah. So you could like get it, and we wonder like what it's like for like a 12 or 13-year-old to watch that, because the way we remember it is very nostalgic, and like I could watch like a Bronson movie like The Evil That Men Do, which is like pretty brutal,
Sure.
but like to me, like the way I watched it back then as a kid, I guess I was the audience for it, and now as an adult, like I appreciated it like on a different level and stuff. So, and funny enough, to mention the name of our podcast, Red River Podcast, we took from Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Oh, great.
So that, because that was like the the radio station and stuff. So
yeah, that's cool. That's really cool.
So for this book, the one you have coming out, do you have I know you set your a release date or just something?
Yeah, I'm really hoping to get it out by the end of the year. At this point, I'm just assembling everything, getting all the images scanned and put it together. I have posters and lobby cards and boxes of that stuff. That's the tedious stuff, editing, and it's gonna come down, I think, to production. This book is much larger than the first one. It's probably gonna be somewhere around 1,000 pages.
Wow, I was gonna say the first one's pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one is significantly larger by almost 1.5 times the size. Just
and the format of the book, you're taking each film and I noticed, like I was reading some the late great Mike McPadden gave you compliments, and I have his the teen book, the teen movie book, and and the heavy metal ones. It's like that. You breaking down each of their films, what the viewer could expect from them, like that kind of format.
Yeah, Mike was actually a huge inspiration. I really started on this project right when heavy metal movies came out, because I wasn't sure if there was a space for cult film books when we have IMDb and everything now that people can just go and look stuff up. Is anybody still going to want a book? And then heavy metal movies landed on my doorstop, and yeah, I was like, okay, this is great. This guy is doing exactly the sort of thing I would like to do. So yeah, yeah, it's so sad he's no longer with us.
It's crazy, right? We wanted to get him on, and I know he started doing a podcast, and I knew that he worked on the Gilbert podcast. I'm like, this dude is like, he was one of us. So when it happened, I was like, how did all right, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's such a shame.
Yeah. I know he covered. Did he cover Hard Rock Zombies? Like, we had no idea that was a canon film.
I think that was in that book, but yeah, that's one of my all-time favorite, like, ridiculous movies. I mean, if you talk over the top, I mean the metalhead stuff, it's got some midgets in there. Hitler makes an appearance. I mean, they just threw everything out in that film. I love it.
Mm-hmm. And did you cover that in the upcoming book?
I can't remember what year that came out.
Yeah, I had to draw a very hard line. It was tough because Canon's catalog is humongous. There's even I think I have the 1985 catalog, just has all of the movies that they own, and they're trying to sell the rights to all these different countries. And there's more than 400 films in there.
Wow.
Which is, so I've taken it down and only gone with the Golden Globus productions because they had so many pickups. So unfortunately, yeah, Hard Rock Zombies is a movie that I love, but it was one they picked up and distributed, and obviously they saw it and they're like, this is totally along the lines with what we're doing. We need to put this out.
It is a massive list of how prolific these guys were, and from watching, I never knew the story obviously as a kid of these two cousins that they almost, the yin and yang, one's like the left side of the brain, one's the right side, one's the money, one's the creative, and I mean, they just pumped out constant stuff, so I would imagine you couldn't watch all of it.
Yeah, no, it's I originally, this project, it started out, I was going to do just my favorite 50 canon movies, and it was going to be one book, and as I learned more and more and found more and more movies, I had to keep expanding and expanding. And yeah, as it is, it's going to take 3 volumes just to cover the Golden Globus produced ones that were released in the US or the UK. That was the other where I stretched it out, because they also did so many productions out of their Tel Aviv studios, out of their Italian studio.
Mm.
It's amazing how much what their output was and what their catalog looked like at their peak.
Yeah, like he would. I love that quote from Menahem where he was just like, they were like, what would you do with a $17 million budget? He's like, I don't know. He's like, make 17 movies. He's like, he's like, that's all I know how to do. I don't know how to make a movie for $17 million. And he's just, man, everything I learned in the very beginning about being an action fan, I learned from like the Canon guys. Like, so I would watch and I'm like, okay, well, you need the main guy. You need him to have a relative that gets killed or a partner. And then from there, he takes revenge and like pretty much smokes everyone. And it just like everything that I learned, and I reminisce and I think of all those movies. And yesterday I watched one of my favorites, which was Delta Force, just to kind of get into the vibe of like the podcast today. And it back then, so like I was 8 years old in 86, and like none of this stuff made sense to me. I'm like, why is this like, like the Israel and Palestine thing? And first of all, it took me till like 2 years ago to realize that was Robert Foster. I don't know how. I never did. I'm like, how is this, the dude from Jackie Brown? So I would imagine you cover Delta Force in the upcoming book, right? So like, speak away on Delta Force, man. One of your favorites too?
Yeah, Delta Force is wild. It's a crazy story, the production behind that one, because it was originally written for Chuck Norris and Charles Bronson. Bronson ended up passing on it, and they replaced him with Lee Marvin. But the original idea for it was going to be your very, very traditional action movie. It was going to be more of the stuff you see, I guess, in the second half with infiltration and all the fancy motorcycle and rocket launchers and saving the hostages. But then a TWA flight got hijacked, and this was in the news. And so they flew over, they shot it in Israel. But while that was happening, Menachem had brought the screenwriter James Brunner with him to keep rewriting it and basing it on this hijacking that was still playing out over in the airport in Lebanon. And they kept waiting, because obviously the first half of the movie is all of that stuff, and that's almost taken page for page from stuff that really happened. A lot of these characters are based on real people, and they kept waiting to find out how this was going to end. At one point, Menachem wanted to send James Brunner to the airport so that he could watch. I
love this guy, right?
James Brunner is thinking, I'm this guy from the Midwest. I'm going to be the only like white guy in this airport where there's an active hostage situation. No. But then what ended up happening is they were hoping for this big, exciting ending, and in the end, the hostages were just released. So instead, they kind of went with this.
Gotta spice that up.
Yeah, their own fantasy, crazy version of what happened there. And some of the stuff is funny. There's actually they had a guy who had worked with the Delta Force as a consultant on the film. And he ended up walking off the set after a certain point because he thought Menachem wasn't taking it seriously, with of course, like the rocket launching motorcycle. And
I mean, that is my favorite, because like, so like, just the logistics of that is so ridiculous, where it's like, how do you even aim that thing? It's like, yeah, whatever, we're gonna get it. But I love
badass.
I know.
Like walk away, set a bomb off behind you, and out.
I'm gonna need a motorcycle, and it's gonna be a rocket launcher. But as a kid, like I loved the more bad guys, the better. When I would watch like the old Batman shows, if there was 2 goons, I'd be like, that kind of sucks. But when they had 10, I'm like, cool. They're gonna like the more people, and I think it started just like I would watch like Commando, like you see Commando, and I'm thinking like this dude, like the kill count on Commando from like Schwarzenegger, he must have killed at least 300 people in this movie. And to me, like that's what I liked. I liked, it was really not about plot. And as you get older, obviously, you attach yourself to certain movies. But as a kid, it's like they're The 80s just made it so you, as long as you had that name, you could do whatever you want, you know, and later on Cobra and all these other things. So, but you mentioned Bruner, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, can you explain to me, because I never really understood the story behind Missing in Action and why it's so like weird. Like it's just, so it's like the first movie and then the second movie is the beginning. Like, just break that down for me.
Yeah. So what happened was James Bruner had been working with Chuck Norris. They had worked together on previous projects. They had met because Bruner's I believe his stepdaughter, his wife at the time worked in one of, didn't work there, but went to one of Chuck Norris's studios, and they had connected that way. And so they'd been working on projects together. Usually Chuck would come with an idea and they sort of spitball back and forth, and Bruner would write it. And Missing in Action was Chuck had wanted to do something about Vietnam. He had lost his brother in Vietnam. And the Missing in Action.
Never knew that. Yeah, that's crazy.
The Missing in Action script is what came of it. And so Chuck took this all over. This was his kind of push, because he didn't want to get stuck doing just martial arts movies, which is kind of what he'd been doing. This one, he still kicks guys. He has a great fight. He has some great fights in it, but he gets to use guns. It turns him into sort of a more well-rounded action hero. Yeah. And Chuck took it all around Hollywood, and nobody really wanted it. And finally, he got this meeting with Cannon, and Cannon brought him in. And what he found out was that they had read a script with Missing in Action and wanted to put him in it, but it wasn't the one he submitted to them. It was another film called Missing in Action that producer Lance Hull, who directed Missing in Action 2, had sent to the company. So they made him read the script right there when he was in the office and say yes or no whether he was going to do it. It was one of those type of, we want to get this into production immediately. And so Bruner's waiting at home to see how this meeting goes. Chuck gets out of the meeting and calls him. He says, I got good news and bad news. The good news is that I want to make, the Canon wants to make a movie called Missing. They're going to make a Missing in Action movie. The bad news is that it's not your script. It's somebody else's, but they're going to buy your script. And so you're not just, so you get some payments.
Okay. Yeah. So they're going to buy a script. That's funny. So then at that point, would you even want to sell it or hold? I mean, I guess it's kind of like the same movie. But
yeah, well, he did. So Missing in Action 2, they went and shot it, and they were putting it together, and they were so excited with the footage they were seeing. It's Missing Action 2, the one that eventually became that. But at the time, it was just called Missing in Action. And so they get down there and they would say they want to make a sequel. They want to make a sequel as fast as possible. They want to shoot it immediately. And so can James come down and start writing it? So he went down where they were shooting it and basically reworked his script that he had originally submitted to them, but changed the character's name so it matched, and sort of made it into a sequel of the original film they made. Cannon gets back. They shot these two films. They submit the first one, Missing in Action 2. The numbers get so confusing trying to tell the story.
Yeah.
They submit Missing in Action 2 to Warner Brothers for theatrical distribution. Warner Brothers says, no, this isn't like the same level of the action movies we're making. We don't want it. So Cannon realizes they have to distribute themselves. They watch the two movies and realize that the second one they made from the Bruner script, the second one they shot, is the much better film. So now that they're already out of their deal with Warner Brothers for the Missing in Action, they released the first one and it's a hit. It's a huge hit. They just flipped the order, and it ended up working out for them because
for sure, because it was one of those movies that everyone knew. Like everyone knew Missing in Action, you know, and you see like Chuck Norris and the cover with his like huge machine gun. And I mean, they ended up getting 2 sequels out of it. I know Braddock was kind of like a bomb for sure, but people definitely recall Missing in Action. But like always, like I would, as I was younger, you'd watch Missing in Action, then Missing in Action at the beginning, and then Braddock, and like at a certain point they like all mixed together. But I love Chuck, man. I would watch these movies, and just recently I watched the movie of his that I've never seen, but it was only because Tarantino mentioned it on Joe Rogan, Silent Rage.
Okay, it's an early one.
Yeah, so like because Tarantino was on Joe Rogan and he's just like, yeah, he's like, I really love Silent Rage because it's like Chuck Norris versus Michael Myers, and I was like, and then I'm flipping through Tubi and it was on and I watched it. Did you watch that one?
It's been a long time, but yeah,
Yeah,
I've
it's
seen it.
like this thing. He's just it is kind of like a weird like slasher ish type thing, but like someone who can't be killed. Like the way we
Mhm.
consider, I consider Terminator, the first Terminator, to be a slasher. It's
Mhm.
like there's no difference. It's like Mike, you can't kill Michael Myers, you can't kill the Terminator or this fucking guy. So
I do love about Canon too. Talking about Chuck Norris at one point, but it was almost like those old studio systems you hear about. They had these like stable of action, the Dudikoff, Chuck Norris,
the
and
pile.
one of my favorites, Charles Bronson.
Mhm.
And that was interesting how they when they went and they bought the rights from for Death Wish 2, correct, from
Yes.
Dino De
Yeah,
Laurentiis,
yeah.
and then hitched their wagon to that and wrote it right into part 2.
Yeah.
Part 3 is one of my favorite, like another over the top. Like they go from like he's just a vigilante doing whatever, and then part 2 they just step it up a notch with like it's like so violent and there's so much rape in it and like it's insane. They put the Canon touch on it, and if you could talk a little bit about the Death Wish film.
Yeah, all 5 of them are like they're so different. Like 1 and 2, like I really didn't even like 2, but 3, 4, and 5 I was in. But go ahead.
Yeah, five is even if you don't love 5, Bronson's getting pretty old at that point. But he has the remote control soccer ball bomb, which is one of my favorite Death Wish kills. Yeah, 3 is a wild ride because the you have this whole thing where it's almost like Paul Kersey as like Macaulay Culkin's character in Home Alone, where he's building the traps and the 2x4s that knock out the crook's teeth. And
he starts with a pistol, and by the end he's got an old like Gatling gun practically with somebody holding his band of bullets. It's insane.
Like all the mail order weapons, which is that's a nutty one. And then you get into the Death Wish 4, which is almost more of a the old Kurosawa formula where you've got the guys, you're pinning the different gangsters against each other.
Yeah.
And yes, I think you can learn a lot about somebody, or it reveals a lot about somebody if you find out what their favorite death wish is. I think that's always, because as any of them are acceptable, and everyone has reasons for loving the ones they love. I like 4. 3 is the craziest, but 4 because we get John P. Ryan in it, who's one of those fantastic classic like 80s bad guy actors. And yeah, but Death Wish and Charles Bronson with go ahead.
I was gonna say, which is the one with is 4 with Danny Trejo with that infamous dummy by now?
Yeah. Yep. The very obvious dummy. There's some great classic stuff between the dummy in Death Wish 4 and the Michael Dudikoff stunt double, who is very obvious in American Ninja 2 because it's a very long shot where it's clear to everybody. You're not fooling anyone that's not Michael Dudikoff right there.
Yeah. And also, here's another one. Brian and I never watched Avenging Force, but when we were going to talk to Sam, we both ended up watching it. Speaking of John P. Ryan. And that movie was very, like, I was not expecting that. That was like that might be his best movie, I think. It's like pretty brutal. And I like, I always say this, if you're willing to kill a kid in a movie, I respect it because no one does that. And, it makes you feel some shit because no one wants to see that. And so the story behind that, I don't know, you probably covered in the new book, right? So it's like it was like a Invasion USA sequel or something like that, right?
Yeah, it was meant to be a Invasion USA sequel, and I honestly don't know if James Booth, who had written it, he gets to play. I believe he's Michael Dudikoff's boss in that, but he's also a villain in American Ninja 4, and he's the villain in Pray for Death, which is a non-canon but a great ninja movie.
Shokasugi.
But he wrote the script, and I don't believe he actually wrote that specifically to be a Invasion USA sequel. I think it's something he wrote and then changed the character's name to Matt Hunter because it's so disconnected from.
So disconnected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Chuck didn't want to do it. He ended up doing Delta Force instead, which I'm happy for. But we ended up getting Michael Dudikoff in it, and yeah, they still kind of kept it as a Invasion USA sequel, even though you don't know how it connects at all, other than the characters named Matt Hunter.
That was like the weirdest part too. And to me, I'm gonna say probably my favorite canon film is Invasion USA. It's just Joe Zito. We wanted to. I'm like, yo, I wanted to find Joe Zito. I'm like, please, we got to talk to Joe Zito. Like the Prowler, Friday the 13th 4. Invasion USA, and then Furstenberg told us that he's in Dubai writing some shit.
Invasion USA is just the epitome of that 80s USA chanting kind of perfect storm. Yeah,
the extra I feel like they took over. Like everything about it looked like fucking real. Like it was just so ridiculous and over the top. And he's like, yo, first of all, Chuck Norris firing Uzis up in this mall. I love it. It's so outrageous. Would you say that's one of your favorites as well?
I always point to it as my favorite of the Chuck Norris, everything Chuck Norris and Cannon did together. That movie's wild. And you said, yeah, it looks real. And because the production value they got, I don't know if you were aware, but the little suburban cul-de-sac they blow up.
I love that scene. The Christmas time. Oh my God, it's insane.
That was a real little suburban neighborhood. They had been slated to demolish. Everyone that got the city came in Atlanta and bought up gave everybody money for their houses and had to move because they're expanding the Atlanta airport. And so all these houses were empty. Cannon came in and decorated them for Christmas. They gave them permission to blow it up. So you're actually seeing real homes that people were living in recently getting explosives set in them. The same thing is with the mall that Chuck Norris is riding on the pickup truck through. Yeah. That was a mall that was a wing of one of the big malls down in Atlanta that they were just gutting to renovate. And they said, oh, sure, you can do anything. So Cannon, because Christmas decorations are the cheapest thing to buy in the middle of summer and to decorate with and definitely create a mood. Right. That's why they decorated the houses, they decorated the mall, and they just were able to trash the place. So that was just some incredible luck they had with production value. And it was nice because Bruner, again, he wrote that one. He got to go on location scouting with Zito for it. So anytime they found something like this, he could write the scene and the script around it, which was perfect.
Us. He seems to be the common theme, definitely. I know you had him, you interviewed him on your first book, right?
Yes. And he actually wrote the foreword for the second one. So he has a great story of some great stories about Menachem in there. He tells stories about originally Michael Winner, after Death Wish 3, was going to make Delta Force 2 for Cannon. And so he has stories about going out to Michael Winner's mansion out in London and working with him on a Death Wish, a Delta Force 2 script that never ended up happening. But yeah, James Bruner's amazing, and he did some great stuff for Cannon. They trusted him, and they would come back to him even for rewrites. There were movies that they had, for example, POW The Escape. If you've seen that one with David Carradine,
no.
It's basically missing action with David Carradine instead of Chuck Norris. They're just making another one, but they got back and they put the movie together, and Menachem wasn't happy with it. Cannon wasn't happy with it. So they had James Bruner come in and they said, okay, we have these 3 actors and these 2 locations that we still have access to and 2 days of shooting. Can you write us scenes for just using that stuff in that little time that'll make this movie make sense? And so that's the kind of stuff he did for them, which is really awesome. He's talented.
Yeah, talented. He's a fixer, and a guy like that you want around. It's okay, it's we have, especially the way it appears that Cannon ran. It was just very impulsive, very much oh, what's the script? okay, let's do it. Let's shake hands, and I need you in production in 2 weeks, and you have 5 weeks to do it.
And also Cannon's way of, reflecting, like breakdancing was popping, got to get a movie out about it, and then we got to get a second one out, as soon as possible, but we've talked a lot of action, but I mean, there's so much different stuff in Cannon besides action and horror. And they did a lot of music stuff from, Breakin' was a success, obviously. Breakin' 2 was a huge movie from my childhood, but also the colossal musical failure of The Apple.
The Apple's on Paramount
I wasn't
Plus.
able to sit through all of it.
Me neither. I tried to. The Apple's up on Paramount Plus now, and you covered in your first book. What a weird. Shit. Even the dude singing in the beginning was kind of flat. Like, it wasn't like he wasn't really that good of a singer and stuff. So, I mean, anything you want to say about The Apple? Just can you even explain the plot to me? I can't. I have no idea.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, The Apple's very special. That's a Menachem Golan. His first movie he directed. I mean, he directed a lot of films in Israel and some very acclaimed ones. What's crazy to think about Cannon is before these guys came and became associated purely with these B movies and like this action horror schlock, they were the most respected filmmakers in their industry, and they had really put Israeli cinema, helped it get out there to international audiences. And it's wild, but yeah, Cannon was their way of infiltrating the US market, of trying to get in. The Apple was it is a biblical sci-fi dystopian disco musical.
Yeah,
I think the easiest way, it's the only one that you can describe that way.
You're right.
But yeah, it's basically it's portraying like the music business as hell, and like you have to make deals with the devil. It's very over the top and very obvious with its imagery. But Menachem thought this was going to be the next Saturday Night Fever. He was sure this was going to be their big hit, and this was really right after they took over Cannon. They put out some smaller films, but this is the first big one that they were going to give a push. They actually released the soundtrack. They kept the rights to the soundtrack themselves, started Cannon Records, which only put out a few releases in the early 80s.
Wow.
Because they were sure the soundtrack was going to put up Saturday Night Fever numbers, that this would fuel movies forever. Well, they screened the movie, and I believe it's in Toronto at the film festival, but the audience is booing the whole time. They handed out the records to everyone who came in and to take the soundtrack home for the premiere screening, and they were allegedly throwing them like frisbees at the screen during the screening. So yeah, Menachem's up in his hotel room, and the way the story goes is the way that he told it over and over again, was ready to jump off his balcony and throw himself off the balcony, and Yoram had to talk him down. So thank goodness he did, because
No, you're
we
right.
got hundreds of movies. But yeah, The Apple is wild. I think everybody should see The Apple at least once, and it's usually one of those ones that people end up seeing again after they've seen it the first time, because it's so weird.
It's good as a group. Like when you watch The Room. Like when I first watched The Room, I watched it by myself, and I was like, "Oh, this isn't fun by myself." Like I'm like watching this movie that's really bad. But I mean, The Apple is obviously just a better production. But I couldn't make it all the way through. But it just I love
it's tough.
I love passion. So the fact that he had that passion for it, and he thinks it's gonna, because when we make shit like, like I play in a band, so whenever we make something, we feel like it's when you put it out there, you're like, oh, this is the best thing that I've ever done. And once it gets received like that, it kind of reminded me whenever I would hear stories when I watched that Troll 2 documentary, and like
best worst movie.
Movie, yeah. So that dude's watching it with the audience, and he's confused as to why people think it. Like he thought people loved it. That's why it was like a cult thing. So, very funny for sure. In your first book, you got a chance to talk to Kane Kasuki. That's pretty cool.
That was exciting. That was very exciting. And it was at a weird hour because he was in Japan at the time working on something.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was great. And he told some stories that I love, just him talking about working in one of his dad's studios, and at Halloween, everyone would come in to buy the ninja costumes, the Shizuku.
I did as a kid. I completely did. Like that was the last time I ever dressed up for Halloween. I was a ninja. It was a big deal. It was a big fucking deal for like 2 years around here.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's thanks to Canon. They really.
That was back in the day when you could order Chinese stars out of the back of Soldier of Fortune magazine, have them shipped right to your house.
Right.
Bunch of 8-10-year-olds throwing metal stars against the
they came in the whole kit too.
Yeah.
You could buy that had the blow dart gun and the belt buckle that had the ninja star on it, which is. I wish I gotta find one of those today because I would love the belt buckle with the removable throwing star.
Could be handy. I know.
Yeah, I tried to get Show, but I ended up getting a note back from him, and it was the most ninja like response. It was upon reflection, upon meditation, I do not think this is the time in my life to reflect upon those years. It was very
yes, that's awesome.
So if I'm gonna get rejected, at least it was in the way that like I could have hoped for, because it was so cool.
Yeah. Part of me is just thinking he's like on the couch with his Al Bundy hand down his pants, just like doing it on his iPhone, being like, I'm not doing this shit.
Right.
Because at this point, like, like he's like an older dude, and he's just like, but we remember Show. Like, to me, I mentioned this, but before Schwarzenegger, there was Sho Kosugi, and everything he did after, I wanted to watch. So once those ninja movies ended, I went for Pray for Death, Nine Deaths of the Ninja. Like anything I saw his name on, I would go to the video store and I would rent, and I would love. And yeah, man, he was a very big deal, especially for someone, making these low budget movies. But like everyone my age grew up, and some of us wrote canon movies about it, canon books like you. Another movie I really wanted to talk about, which was fucking huge for me, was Exterminator 2. Did you love that movie?
Exterminator 2 is another one with a crazy story behind it.
Okay.
But yeah, I
saw that in the theaters.
Wow, yeah, that had to have been great. That was one that the whole thing was shot. They had Ginty there, they had Faison there, and they filmed the whole thing, and Canon got it back, and they weren't happy with it. It was too short. Certain things, they wanted more action. So they brought in William Sachs, who was a famous fixer of films.
Okay, yeah, you had him in for the first book.
Yeah, and he ended up directing a sex comedy that I cover in the second one that we talk about in there. But yeah, so they brought him in and they said, hey, can you fix this? The issue is like Ginty is off shooting something else. We don't have him. We don't have, I'm forgetting the name of the main actress, but we don't have her right now. And you can't shoot in New York because we've cleared out all those production offices. We're shooting something else there. You have to shoot in LA, which New York and LA aren't exactly interchangeable.
No.
And so they didn't even have the garbage truck, which is a pivotal part of that movie. So it's amazing how he finally figured out. He got them to take one concession and to drive one of the New York garbage trucks out to LA. So that was, somebody actually had to do that, and I'm sure that cost a ton in gas in the 80s.
Yeah, are you kidding me? Absolutely.
But that was where the budget went. So Bill Sachs went through all the footage and all the outtakes, and he found the outtakes where Robert Ginty is working on this truck, and he's putting on the mask and he takes it off, or it's the end of the take. So he takes off the mask and he's like sweaty, and apparently Ginty hated wearing that welding mask, and it was only for the one scene. And Bill thought, if I take this short little chunk of film, we reverse it, we can have him putting on the mask. And so that's all the Ginty we need to finish this movie, because anybody can be wearing that mask at that point. Yeah. So then he went and shot all the stuff with the flamethrower, with a stunt double, there was no Robert Ginty at all in any of those scenes. And those are all the action scenes that people remember, all the burning people in the warehouse at the end. That was for a while, that was the most stuntmen burning at once.
Yeah, it was
in a film.
That ending is, and that's what I remember. It's like, there's always that scene or that part in these movies where it's like the good guy, like, either gets like 100 guns that he's going to kill everyone with, or he has that garbage truck that he turns into like this, like, kill machine with weapons that make no sense. Like it's like I'm gonna put this gun on a swivel and everyone's gonna die. But I love, I loved it. Mario Van Peebles. I just remember, I know Brian as well. We love sleazy '80s New York movies, because it just reminds me of that time. And I just remember Exterminator 2 being one of my favorites. I watched it probably within the last few years, and it's such a grimy, gross movie. And I'll tell you one funny part. I've never seen Exterminator 1. Never seen it. I don't think
you need to.
I don't think I need to, right? I know
not
you're
to follow
right.
it.
Like Steve James was in it, I'm pretty sure.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was cool. And another movie that I know that you like, 10 to Midnight is my favorite Bronson movie.
Oh yeah, it's so good.
That movie, we had that movie on VHS, and I probably watched it at probably, I don't know, 7 or some shit. But it's one of those movies. It's a really good Bronson movie. Like it's a legitimately great Bronson movie. So, give me something.
Yeah, that was one I almost mentioned earlier when you're talking about movies that we would classify as slashers that aren't necessarily that one, because the whole ending, it looks like it's a slasher movie until the very end when Bronson finally comes back into it. And it's really well done and scary. But yeah, that's a fantastic one. Again, it's like Invasion USA is my favorite of Chuck's movies with Cannon. 10 to Midnight's my favorite of Bronson and Cannon working together. But yeah, it just had a lot going for it. I think the soundtrack's great. J. Lee Thompson. Gosh, now I'm bugging myself because I can't remember the name of the actor, Gene something, I believe, who plays the main villain, but he's slimy and gross and evil as all can be,
and naked.
Yeah, they shot that,
make it even worse.
They shot all those scenes twice, which is incredible because they wanted a TV print. So I've never seen it on a Blu-ray, and I'm sure it's out there in a cut somewhere. Somebody has a VHS tape who taped it off of the movie channel or something back in the day. But there's an underwear cut of the film where he is wearing. Yeah, he's wearing underwear in all those scenes. So because they would shoot it once naked and they would have him shoot it again with underwear on, just so they would have something to sell to television.
It's like the radio edit, like you gotta cut.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, and I love the very ending of that movie. If you haven't seen it, fuck you. But it's building up, and it's like, the villain is telling Bronson that I'm sick and I'll come back and all this other shit. And one thing about Bronson, for some reason, maybe not in Death Wish 3, but like he always had this like little gun. It was always like a little revolver. Like it was just this tiny little fucking gun, and he had it. And maybe that was like the gun the cops carried back then. But it was just this little teeny tiny thing. And he fucking smoked that dude. First of all, he shot into a group full of cops, which is crazy. No one even flinched. No one said nothing, and the dude caught a bullet and the
Chuck
head.
gets a pass.
Yeah, totally.
Yep.
So
great one.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
No, I was just gonna touch on it. We talked some action, we talked the musical, and then also their forays into the comedy field. But even though this film isn't purely, it's pretty deep actually for a teen sex comedy of The Last American Virgin, which here you have, like it's a teen sex comedy, but they throw in the abortion scene, and the hero does not, get the girl. Like there's a lot of that, and there's stuff made in the documentaries about their transition from Israeli film and to American sensibilities. And this was a sort of a remake of a film they had success with in Israel.
Yeah, they actually had made this whole series of movies. I think there's maybe 10 total at this point. Lemon Popsicle was the name of the movie. And it was directed by the same director who did Last American Virgin, Boaz Davidson. And yeah, they had success with it. They had a couple sequels already made, and it was successful all over the world except for in the US. They couldn't sell it. It's very, very similar. Like so many of the shots and scenes in Last American Virgin are taken exactly out of Lemon Popsicle, except that Lemon Popsicle was set in the 50s and had all the 50s music. They updated it for when they made it in the US, because that's what they
Right.
thought why it never came here. But Lemon Popsicle was very popular in Germany, in Japan, unexpectedly. But they thought they could just make it again and have this success here. And one of the things I think them having the soundtrack that they did
Hmm.
was incredible, because you have U2 on there, you have Devo, all these great 80s rock and new wave acts. And something else that I think that really works, like they touch on real subjects. That there's the sex has consequences in it and things like that,
Hmm.
that make it real. But they actually use teenagers, and that was very uncommon in those movies until then. People point at Fast Times at Ridgemont High being one of the first ones to use actual young actors, but Last American Virgin came out first and shot much earlier, actually, because it sat on their shelves a long time. So both those movies really changed that, because after that, then you get to John Hughes, where
Right.
all of these movies have young teens. But before that, teenagers were going to these movies and they'd see these films, and it was always like 28, 29-year-old actors playing high schoolers. And yeah, Lawrence Munson, who's in that, I think he had to lie about his age to even be able to get the work papers. He had to get a fake ID to work on it, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But they were all young. They were all super young, and that it ended up being a great movie.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the ending is a doozy, I think.
Americans like their happy ending, you know.
That's the yeah. That's why, like,
And,
whenever we get to a bad ending, like I was telling, we had this discussion. Me and Brian had it yesterday. Like, canon for sure in a lot of movies. Like, I just always got so used to like the good guy winning, and then once I was like, I watched the movie Miracle Mile, which I always reference. And then that was like the first time I saw an ending where I was like, this is not a very happy ending. And even They Live was like that for me too, where I was just like, I don't even know what just happened. And it was like devastating for me. And then as I got older, I'm like, oh, these are the endings that I like, because you just relate to it different. But I know that you're planning on doing a third book, which was like scripts that never turned into movies, right?
Yeah, so Canon, very famously, I mean, they funded most of their movies through pre-sales. They would go and they would take a catalog, or they would have mock-ups of posters, folders, and things like that they would send to buyers everywhere, all over the country. And that was where Yoram was a genius. Yoram was really good with this, and the people that worked for him. And they would have an idea, and usually the idea, 10 to Midnight's a classic example. They had made Death Wish 2, and they knew they wanted to make another movie with Bronson, but they didn't know what the movie would be, because Cannon was offered The Evil That Men Do. That was the next one he made, but they wanted $200,000 for the script or something, and Cannon's like, we pay that much for a script? No way. So instead, they made the sort of like a handshake agreement that Bronson would appear in a Cannon movie, and they came up with the title 10 to Midnight. There was no story. You even if you look at some of the early ads, it's a picture of it's a globe, like the planet Earth, with Charles Bronson with a gun, and it has a quote about international terrorists.
So good.
And it's nothing to do with what the movie finally was. And they took it and they sold it. And so they would, they sell it to Italy, they would sell it to Germany, Japan, all over. And once enough people had bought a movie, then they would figure out how to make it. And oftentimes they were sort of making movies to fit posters or concepts they had pitched that they hadn't really thought out. 10 to Midnight was one where they had a movie that was just kind of fit. The title still doesn't make sense. It has nothing to do with the film, but they were stuck with it. But that was an example of they found another script that kind of fit what they wanted to do with them. But yeah, so they had sold a Bronson movie with no plot or premise or anything. And made it. But yeah, so Canon would do this, and they would have catalogs, and you'd go through these catalogs, and they're this thick, and half of the movies, a third of the movies, would be ones that is just them throwing ideas out there and seeing what sticks. And for example, I mean, even famously, I talked about it on another podcast recently, specifically about this, but they had done a 60-page spread at Cannes, the Cannes Film Festival in 1986, announcing 60 movies that they were going to make in 1986 and 1987, which is crazy, because even if you're a
Crazy.
major studio,
Yeah.
if you make 15 movies in that time, people consider you going too busy. This is Canon wanting to put a new movie into theaters almost every week, which, doing the math, if they had succeeded, they would be competing with themselves. They would with having multiple new movies in theaters on weekends, because there's only 52 weeks in the year. But yeah, they never bothered to do the math. And then again, most of those movies, there weren't really ideas in place. They were just mocked up posters that somebody had drawn. Sometimes a star attached, sometimes not, sometimes directors, and so on and so forth. But yeah, from that 60, there were at least even 20 in that never went anywhere, which is crazy. But yeah, so at this point, because I've been working on this for years and years, I have lots of these catalogs and newspaper ads. I have materials for, my count I think is at 105 Canon movies that they announced but never made. And that's the last section of the last book. The third one will cover 1988 onward, and there are some good ones in there. You get Canon movies like, well, you get Bloodsport and Cyborg when Van Damme finally comes in.
Pretty big for them too. Like,
yeah,
Bloodsport was like, you know,
yeah, Bloodsport ended up being a hit, but it just unfortunately came too late. And what's a bummer is they sat on it for a while. That was a movie that they thought was unreleasable, which is crazy because.
Well,
it just seems they would just get ahead of themselves, and just like, I mean, watching that the Go-Go Boys doc, I can't how they kind of, they should have pumped the brakes a little bit, before going into like Superman. I can't remember who was speaking on it, but before they went into Superman 4 and things like that.
But the bleeding, so it was like, I think it started with Over the Top.
Yes.
Like Over the Top, because you're like, it's funny, watching that movie, which I recently did because I saw it on Prime, and you want to talk about a movie that did a lot for arm wrestling, like did for ninjas. They're like, arm wrestling, let's do it.
Maybe I think it's the only arm wrestling movie ever made, right? It's gotta
but
be.
Like, me and my cousins would arm wrestle because of this movie, and we all tried to do the over the top move. But I think.
But did you arm wrestle for the custody of your child, or like,
no?
Did you go stakes that high?
Thank God, no. Thank God. But great soundtrack, and rewatching it, there's still some charm to the movie. It's ridiculous, but they got all these like big dudes that look like they're ready to beat each other up, but all they're doing is arm wrestling, which is funny. But I think so. From there, the bleeding started because that was kind of like a bomb, because it came out around the same time as Cobra.
And they paid Stallone's, what, 10 million, was it? Or
12 million.
12 million.
Highest paid actor in history at that point.
And I always love when they were like, you can't get Stallone. He gets 7 million. And he's like, I'm not going to pay him 7 million. And then you figure you go to 8 maybe as your first offer. Let's go to 12.
Yeah.
It's like 12. All right, fine, and he did it because he's thinking like, fuck it, even if this movie bombs, it's whatever. I feel like that was like his first like bomb for sure. But then Masters of the Universe and Superman 4 were just like, man, I don't know about you, Austin, but like I grew up loving Masters of the Universe and He-Man and like the toys and that stuff.
Sure.
And when that movie came out, I was like, who the fuck are these people?
Hey, where's Battle Cat? Where's Orko?
But these movies are every movie I've mentioned is like Masters of the Universe is up on Showtime. Then Superman 4. Like all these movies I recently watched because I don't know, they're there. And
they live again.
HBO Max, and I just look at them differently now. You still like Superman 4 had the best intentions. I thought it really did. And in comparison to like 2, the special effects were kind of like obviously way less than, but not by much. Like they're still kind of like very primitive and stuff. So what did you think of like the Superman 3 into 4? Did you like 3 or 4?
I think you're right. I think 4 had very good intentions. They DC Comics had published a comic book based on the original script. The novelization is based on the original script, so you can sort of get an idea of what this movie might have looked like had they not cut the budget by such a drastic amount. I think 4 would have been better than 3, at least in my opinion, if they had had the money that they had needed to actually make it, but they had to tear entire pages of the script out. Obviously, the special effects took a huge hit because the people that they were going to bring back from the prior movies all quit once they heard the budget was being cut. I think 4 would have been much better, but it was one of these ones that it hit canon at it was being made at a really bad time where they had to pull the money. That's the same with Masters Universe. Masters Universe is one that there would have been much more to it had canon not been standing there waiting to actually pull the plug on the shoot before it was really finished. Canon did something. Pumping the brakes was a big thing. The other big mistake that they made was right in 1986 they bought Thorn EMI and Elstree Studios, which is a big giant production facility in the UK. They had this line of credit that was something like $300 million.
Wow.
That was extended to them because, like I said, like you had Missing in Action, you had Break-In, and all these movies that were low budget movies that they were turning a profit on. And up until that point, really, these movies would come out in theaters not paying much, but they were always making money on them because they made the money from selling them, the video rights, cable rights, international rights. They always spent less on the movies than they had already made before sending them into production. But then Canon started making these bigger and bigger films, which was not what they were really, that wasn't what they were good at. And so with $300 million, you had that great Menachem quote earlier. They could have made, endless $5 million Chuck Norris and Michael Dudikoff movies, and these would have done well and they would have survived a long time. They took that $300 million and instead of spending it on the movies that they should have, the budgets of the movies that they'd already sold, they bought Elstree Studios, which is where Raiders of the Lost Ark was filmed, Empire Strikes Back, The Shining. And if you're a company that is very good at making $5 million Chuck Norris movies in the Philippines, what do you need with the studios where they shot Empire Strikes Back? And it's crazy because after they bought it, they were only able to shoot 2 movies there, and that was Superman 4 and a very small action movie, another one with Robert Ginty, 3 Kinds of Heat. And it's just nuts because then they had to sell that because they were out of money. They didn't have money. They could have spent that money but on Superman 4, and they didn't have it anymore because they blew it on real estate. And it's just, besides getting too big, working too fast, and then some very, very unwise investments, or really did them in all at once. This all came to a head right in late 86, early 87, and things looked very dire all of a sudden.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just, it's amazing. Like you said, if they just stuck to what they were good at, they could have done all this stuff. Maybe I love the fact that Joe Zito was going to do the Spider-Man movie because to me, Michael Dudikoff, he was kind of like a star, like he was just like completely someone who, is that AC? Is that your AC?
That's mine.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. You want just cut it for a minute?
It's gonna take a while to wind down.
But... Okay. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Just mute yourself for a minute. So anyway, I mean, we're gonna wrap up here anyway, but just I always thought he was like a star, and I just feel like he never really got like a proper shake, because everything that he could have done that. I mean, I don't know how good the Superman movie would have been, but if Joe Zito was behind it, the fact that he did Invasion USA and it was such a big production, it's such a bummer, that he didn't get a chance to. So.
Yeah, Michael Dudikoff, an actor that I love. I think he's great in everything I've seen him in, especially I love so many of his Canon things. But the problem with him and Canon is Canon was going broke. Their productions were getting smaller and smaller as his name was getting bigger and bigger. And any proper studio at that point would have just continued to showcase them in bigger and bigger and better things. And instead, you have American Ninja, you have Avenging Force, but then the movie's getting these smaller and smaller budgets.
Yeah.
It's just unfortunate because I I think he's fantastic, and I think he should have been an even bigger star. But he did do very good. He had he made a lot of movies, continued through the '90s. He had a TV show,
Yeah.
called Cobra, that was
No, for sure.
was a lot of fun. So
Yeah, no. I believe me. I mean, he seems pretty
Yeah.
happy on the IG for sure. So good for
Mhm.
him. But man, we would love to have you back whenever the second or third book drops, whatever you want to do, because I want to talk about Hellbound and how unbelievable that movie is. That I just recently watched that, and that is one of the most ridiculous movies I've ever seen in my life. So
Yeah,
but
I would love to come back. Thank you.
yeah, man, we're just hanging. We're just gonna talk, canon and action movies. And last question: aside from canon, what else would you like 5 years from now? What's another book or idea you would love to tackle?
Oh man. So yeah, I think about that a lot. I have a few ideas for things that I've got a few more years of canon ahead, but
For sure.
I'll be happy to write about something besides canon afterwards. And I mean, I don't know if you guys are fans of Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yeah, for sure.
There's an idea. I mean, so many of the movies I know, at least this changed now, but 10 years ago, you would look at the IMDb bottom, the worst movies of all time, and it would all be movies that were featured on that, because
Yeah.
before streaming, that was the only time, like, opportunity for a while for people to see movies like Hobgoblins and Werewolf and stuff that it was. So they created this canon of movies that are considered bad movies, but people know them now, and they kind of give them this exposure. And so one idea I'm kind of playing with is writing about something that would be basically similar to this, not as much about the history of the show, but about the movies that appeared on it, because people know the Mystery Science Theater movies as a body of work, or not a body of work, but as a I'm struggling for words, but this as like a collection of movies. So look into a lot of how a lot of these were made.
Oh yeah,
Talk
yeah,
to some of the people who,
for sure.
similar to this, talk to the people who made them. Some people were thrilled that their stuff appeared on Mystery Science Theater 2000 because people saw it
Yeah.
that way. And it's a similar approach to what I've done with canon, but with those movies that were
Those
featured
movies,
on
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So that's something I
Wow,
would think would be fun.
Your wife is gonna love watching those with you.
Yeah. She's watched a lot of them with me over the years. So
I bet. Awesome. Yo, thank you so much for doing it. Thank you for your time. Man, let's do it again.
awesome. Thank you. Would love to.
Cool. Later, buddy.